Today we have two renowned Indian companies who are already doing business in Japan and are going to share their views about doing business in Japan. And first, may I request Mr. Rajesh Shes, Executive Vice President of HCL Corporation, to give his presentation. Mr. Shes, please.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. Alasan, thank you very much for inviting us to talk about HCL as a case study of success in Japan. So most of this audience, being Indian, I think would be familiar of what we do at HCL. It's a $7 billion corporation, and it is typified by an extraordinary culture of developing its employees, and that has been the hallmark of what has driven growth in the company. This chart actually describes the anatomy of the company by way of the vertical segments it operates in and the horizontal services it delivers. So what I want to highlight here is that in Japan, our success has been primarily around engineering and R&D services business, which is the core of HCL's business, which is about 19% of our business globally. But in Japan, it contributes to more than 95% of the business that we do there. And it is very interesting that in engineering process, there has been a significant bilateral exchange of ideas and thoughts between HCL and our customers in Japan, which I'll briefly talk about here. So our history in Japan started in 1996, Mother-son, 2 years before you thought we started. Yeah. So last year, we were 20 years in the company, in the country. And so one of the things that we've learned, and all those who aspire to be in Japan, is that you've got to be patient. And that's the first thing that you've learned from Japanese companies. I mean, they are very, very patient. I mean, and that virtue actually is something that if we adopt, success will come our way, right? So it's an important tenet. Be patient, hang in there. And a number of our competitors have looked at Japan tactically and have come in and gone out and come in and gone out, have varied in the degree of intensity that they've adopted. But we've kind of hung in there, and today that's where we stand. 2,300, which is roughly about 2.3% of our total workforce, is engaged in Japan business globally. And we service Japan customers from United Kingdom, we service them from US, from India, and locally in Japan. Japan was very quick to recognize HCL's employees first, customer second culture, and we won some recognition awards in 2010. So this is our story about HCL. So one of the characteristics that most organizations from India talk about is how many Japanese-speaking people they have in the organization. And we've been investing in that quite steadily. And if one has to say that, you know, at the executive level, what we've observed that people converse and speak in English, but at the operating level, particularly when you're doing engineering work, and I'm sure when you do IT work as well, their language barrier is a significant challenge that you need to overcome. You know, one of the conversations that I was having with a senior executive with one of our customers is that he said very openly that, look, if you speak Japanese, your counterparts feel that you are one of them. If you speak English, you are an alien. So it's while conversation can occur, but the subtleness of communication that Japan culture, which is so deeply embedded in the language, exactly like the way it is in India, I mean, that's a gap which is a difficult one to overcome, and I think we need to acknowledge that. So we've been investing very heavily in that area of our business. The second aspect, one is patience. The second thing that has been a big takeaway for us is building and investing in relationships. So the good news is that a relationship in Japan, while it takes a long time to cultivate, it is deep, and the roots are very, very deep. So you can actually, it's difficult to uproot relationships in Japan once established. So, and we've seen this across these 8 different areas of engagement. I mean, we engage in consumer electronics, large leading manufacturer of consumer electronics. We design their products from Bangalore and locally from Noida and Japan. We are writing operating systems for a large vector computing system for a Japanese computer maker. So there is a fair amount of hardcore R&D and activity that HCL engages in Japan, which is very good. What has been a significant gain for HCL, apart from just getting business, has been the significant impact on our quality systems. So one of the things that Japan companies teach you is to establish a process for doing any input-output transaction so that you can actually continue to drive improvement in the process. And that's something that our organization has benefited for our engagement in Japan. So when we look at challenges, particularly in the context of our business, so there's some technical ones, there's some obvious ones. So language and culture, of course, is a challenge. I mean, but if you reflect on the way we operate in India as well, I think language and culture is a challenge in India as well. I mean, to break into break that barrier needs patience, needs effort, and needs relationships. But that's something that is very obvious and we continue to work on. There are a couple of things that are very typical to Japan, which I think is something that sometimes can be a hindrance. So one of the things Maeda-san Japan companies do is that they sign only 3-month contracts. I mean, they would just, so that a piece of work would be going on for 5 years, but they sign a 3-month agreement. Now, which is pretty interesting, that you sign a statement of work, you sign a master services agreement, you sign the whole range of activity, and the duration of that is 3 months. Now, why is that done? Is there any statutory need, etc.? But that's the extent to which a documented commitment is made, and that's very different from an American or a European business that we engage with. The second thing is that the size of a business transaction, therefore, in Japan tends to be rather small in the context of our industry. So when we look at a business transaction in the United States of America, it is not inconceivable to have a $200-300 million business transaction, which is long-term, which involves a significant amount of commitment from both parties. The business transactions tend to be smaller. We are seeing a shift occur. Larger business transactions we're starting to see in Japan as well, but they're far few and fewer as compared to what we see in Europe and US. We also see sometimes a very short-term view of looking at cost saving, which often results in Japan companies as well as folks like us, take short-term decisions. Now that's much lesser as compared to some of the other markets that we operate in, but that's something that we should try to work on. I've talked about some of these key success factors, which is highlighted here, and the strongest of them being have patience, work on cultural integration, build relationships, and focus on value creation. And those things have worked pretty well for us. And keep in mind that when we are actually engaging with a Japanese company in R&D and engineering services, which is where they are the strongest in the value chain, it is pretty important that you get very, very good at some of these things. And these factors, the focus on these has served us very, very well. And we have continued to grow in Japan, irrespective of whether the economy in Japan has been growing or otherwise. And today we are a sizable business there. And in terms of the bottom line, I would say that our Japan business compares very well with the rest of the business that we do anywhere else in the world. So when we look at what is, a little bit of what are the kind of trends that we are seeing, if you look at the value chain associated with Japanese companies, fundamentally they're very strong in the manufacturing part of the value chain. And they are beginning to see the need to expand and develop that capability in the rest of the elements of value chain. And there we sense a lot of opportunity, because manufacturing is clearly an area of strength, but there are other elements of value chain where we can make a significant contribution. We are also seeing customers engage with us in their need to globalize. It is just not the technology element of their products to globalize, but as Mr. Rawat pointed out, it is the human resource element that a couple of our customers are beginning to engage with HCL on globalizing. So they use an HCL development center in Bangalore or Chennai as a kind of a globalization center for some of their executives. So they post these executives in these centers to serve their subsidiaries across the world and thereby create global citizens. So this activity of globalization is another area where we are seeing significant amount of opportunities for companies like ours and companies in India to participate with the Japanese companies. And of course, best practices all across is an area which is pretty significant. Here what I want to do is spend a minute in terms of what we are seeing in the IT sector and the limitations in Japan and where the opportunity resides for organizations like us. So this is a pretty busy slide which talks about 4 dimensions of change that are occurring. The business models are changing, which all of us are aware of, the technology landscape, the markets themselves, and management practices. Now fundamentally, if you were to translate that into technology, what we observe is that there is softwareization of technology that is coming up. Now softwareization is not a perfect English word, but you guess what's going on here. Now if you were to look at functions that are performed by hardware that are increasingly getting to be performed by software. So if you look at a classical automobile, you will find that millions of lines of code that sits in an automobile which actually perform functions that were performed electromechanically. You look at a printer, we design printers for a Japanese company. The amount of software that resides in a printer today is multiple times over as compared to what it was a few years ago. Now look at the challenge that Japan faces by this phenomena called softwareization. And you see certain market trends that are pretty important. Japan is very good at mechanical and electronic design and manufacturing. Wish Japan was as good on go-to-market and time-to-market aspects associated with software. You don't see a global independent software vendor from Japan. And the reason is that, there is nothing called as perfect software. And if you try and build perfect software, you will never get it out of the market. So when you have a situation like this, and softwareization is occurring in such rapid way. Japanese companies are struggling to keep pace with the demand of software projects, right? So that's an area of significant opportunity, and as Maeda-san referred to, and also Mr. Rawat referred to in their talks, yeah, that's a significant opportunity for companies such as HCL to get into relationships with Japanese companies to serve them in both ways. One is not just serve them in Japan, but also take their products, technology, and solutions globally. Once they're softwareized, right? So we see a significant opportunity and an area where we find that the companies in Japan are going to see greater and greater challenges that will emerge. We find very big brands struggling to hire software engineers in Japan. So essentially, we continue to invest in Japan. We see it as a big market. We will continue to invest in Japan. We're seeking to make some acquisitions in Japan in order to bridge cultural and language barriers, etc. And the promise is on. So this is how we are helping our customers. Essentially, we are helping our customers in technology innovation. We are helping our customers with go-to-market, which is expanding global reach for their products. And we are helping our customers in the area of cost innovation. We see a shift occurring across these three things. While in the initial phase of our engagement, Japan customers used us for cost innovation more than a go-to-market and technology innovation. But then now when we host an IoT seminar, which we've done 2 years in a row, and 2 years ago we talked to people about a new development process, which is agile process, now essentially which emanates out of the Japanese lean thinking, but it's least adopted in Japan. When we talked about these, we had executives and technologists from all across Japan come and attend those sessions and engage with HCL. So the going is good. As long as we are patient, we are willing to hang in there. The land of the rising sun is very, very welcoming, and the business is great. Thank you very much for this opportunity, Maeda-san. It's a pleasure being here.